and all that stuff that aren't sick enough for Centrelink to decide they're vulnerable.
Correct. And also with mental health, unless you've actually been sort of committed for some reason, half the time they don't consider that either.
No, they don't.
So, why the hell would you harass people the way Centrelink does with the robo-debt? Like, I was talking to a journalist yesterday and her partner is being harassed by Centrelink at the moment for a robo-debt. And, she's in her mid-30s and they're both professional people. And her partner is struggling coping with the harassment.
Yeah.
This is someone who's in a stable relationship, educated person.
An adulty adult, as we say.
An adulty adult, as you would say.
Adulty adult.
And is really struggling with the harassment. So how does some 21-year-old who's couch surfing and probably has a mental health issue or something else and is basically on their own supposed to cope with this?
Or a 55-year-old who's recently divorced, whose kids are adult and aren't around to help out, and they've been, they don't have a job and they've got no super because the husband had all the super. And
I don't know how many I saw on Twitter alone who were single mums suddenly in tears because, I don't know, something hadn't been ticked at Centrelink and they didn't get their payment just before Christmas.
Yeah.
And Centrelink's closed. Stiff shit. Like, really?
And along this vein, a tweet from Angry Budgie. They have people aged 60 to 65 and half doing work for the dole. These are people that have medical issues, not enough to count with Centrelink, but enough to impact their workability. And that's what I was sort of saying before, that Centrelink has this really stupid way of deciding whether you're sick enough for help. So they put you in there's this grey area. I would love to give it a name, but there's a grey area that Centrelink likes to put people in where you're too sick to actually work and hold a real job. So they'll either chuck you into these disability service employment agencies that basically make you lie to employers, and then employers get a government handout for hiring you, or if they hire you, or you have to do work for the dole and they basically treat you like slave labour and it's really horrible and you're just counting the days until you're old enough to get your actual pension. And it's really horrible because basically Centrelink goes, well, you're not sick enough to be on disability, but you're too sick to do anything else. So there's this horrible grey area. And I'm just absolutely pulling things out of my butt. But I would guess that a lot of the people that were in that vulnerable section that ended up potentially killing themselves were in that grey area.
Well, I'd say too that there's an issue with that, as Angry Budgie said, with the 60 to 65, because as most people who are over the age of 60, hell, half the time over the age of 50, know that it's not all equal. Like, if you've been sitting at a desk in a bank until you were 60, your body is very different to someone who was, say, a brickie.
Yeah.
And a brickie at 60 is still being forced to go out and do these things. And they've got a lot of nagging aches and pains and problems everywhere. And
problems that Medicare won't help them with.
And they're
Let's just toss that in there too.
Yeah, I was talking to one guy a couple of weeks ago and he's in this situation. He's 64 and he is so depressed and he feels like a failure. And I was trying to talk him into actually going and seeking help because he needs help.
Yeah.
And he is just so focused on the fact that he's useless, he can't do the jobs he's
Actually, I want to interrupt you for a sec.
And it's horrible.
Before we continue, I would like to just, from now that we're getting seriously into it, trigger warning right now for anything mentioning of mental illness, suicide, depression, despair, all of that stuff. We're going to be going a lot more into detail about this for the rest of the podcast. So here is your warning at the halfway point now. Continue.
Yeah, it's really, really important because we're going to be telling a very serious family story. And if you do have a mental health problem, you may not want to listen any further.
And we will have the number for Lifeline and all that jazz in the descriptions of wherever you're listening to this.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
Anyhow, this man who, he used to be a brickie, that's why I used it as an example. He is, I would say, like, I'm no psychologist, but he's beyond depressed. He is really, really struggling and he really needs to go and seek some help. Centrelink don't care. His family don't know how to react with him anymore because they're walking around on, eggshells, because this previously very proud man who used to provide for his family can't anymore. And it's through no fault of his own. He worked for a company, it went bust, another one went bust, the area he lives in, he can't move from the area he lives in. He actually has a very elderly mother. His wife struggles a bit as well. They've got all their people there. The only thing he has is his home. And we're not talking, franking credits homes. We're talking a shitty joint, probably about 35 minutes outside Geelong. So,
but it's his.
at least that's about the only sort of silver lining he has, is that he's not paying rent. He's just paying rents, because they did, pay off the house a couple of years ago, and he can't even sell that. And he's tried to do that, and he is just being treated like crap. He can't face his friends. He won't even go and see his friends because he's ashamed of where he is.
Well, mental illness is so incredibly isolating. It is one of the most isolating things. And not only is it isolating just because of stigma and how people talk about it, but literally the mental illness in your brain is telling you all the reasons why you should be isolated and convincing you why you should be staying out there, not talking to people, because that's just how it works, and it's insidious and disgusting.
And pain. The man has been a brickie since he was 14 years old. He's now had to finish up at 60. His body is wrecked.
Yeah.
It is fully wrecked. But as he said to me, and Dad said, I've got tears in my eyes, he would be better off with Centrelink if he went out into his back shed that he's got there and just cut his arm off.
Yeah.
Why is he even thinking that?
Well,
he thinks, he was talking about that, oh yeah, I'm joking. But when you're talking to someone and they're not joking.
Yeah. Well, I remember distinctly having thoughts, and this was before Robodebt. I remember having thoughts of things would be so much easier with Centrelink if I was more worse off, if I was in a wheelchair, if I was so bad that I had been sanctioned, if all these really horrible things, and no one should ever be made to feel like they should be in that state.
No.
To be able to get any kind of help at all.
And this is where we're going to explain. Caitlin, cross fingers, touch wood, everything else so far, hasn't gotten a Robodebt. But when she first finished school and went down to the Gold Coast to university, she did, she was on Centrelink, obviously. And also at the time, which we didn't know, yes. She had bipolar. We didn't know she had bipolar. It hadn't been diagnosed yet.
I was one of those lucky young folk who had early onset bipolar 2 and anxiety, among other things, because it's never just one thing. It's called comorbidity. I was one of those unfortunate folks who had it early onset with no diagnosis, because no one takes anything that happens to teenagers seriously. And by no one, I don't mean my parents. They were great. I was a secretive squirrel, little, hiding away as much as I could. But I spoke to doctors, school counsellors, everything, and they were just, oh, you're just an angsty teen, whatever. So, I had onset at 14, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was almost 19, after spending a year on the Gold Coast, going to uni, making everything so much worse with my mental health, because I'm having undiagnosed hypomanic swings lasting for weeks while alone, living with family that aren't sort of let's just say that they weren't really equipped to handle it, and there was no help, and Centrelink halfway through the year cut me off. They decided that they had made a mistake with how they sorted out my parents' income, because they have a trust and not, regular income and whatever. So they decided that even though I had moved a few hundred kilometres away from my family home to do a degree that wasn't available within a few hundred kilometres of my family home, they cut me off. So I had to live off of the $5,000 relocation plus startup scholarship for the entire year. And
the reasoning for them cutting off was wrong anyhow.
Yeah, and why they cut me off was wrong. And all that time, they were harassing me to pay them back. So I don't know how many hours my dad spent on the phone basically shouting at them, because there's something clearly wrong with me. And at this stage, no one still knew something was wrong. It was just
we just were worried because you were stressed.
Yeah, because I'm clearly stressed up my eyeballs.
And trying to go to classes.
Trying to get a job. And on top of this, I have chronic pain. So I hit the jackpot. So I had chronic pain. So I was trying to study full-time in a city where I didn't have a lot of support, while trying to also find a job that I could do even with my chronic pain. So which is in my wrist and hand. So I'm trying to lie to potential employers that, oh, I'm just wearing this because I'm playing some sport later, or, oh, it's just a bit strained, it's fine. When in actuality, I couldn't count coins out of the till. I couldn't focus on things. I was on so many, I was one of those kids that had to go through the school day with a shitload of painkillers. I'm one of those people that were like, oh, isn't it so good you're not addicted to codeine now? I was on the cusp. So with all of that, I was also trying to deal with that. So I couldn't just go to Macca's and get a job while I was studying. I couldn't just do all these things. And I'm getting sicker and sicker, and more things are going wrong, and there was just no help from anywhere. And there was about a week where I was basically couch surfing. Thankfully, we had family friends on the Gold Coast that were able to help me out. But I ended up having to drop out of uni and come home and be like, well, shit's wrong. Something's wrong. Something's not right. Centrelink cut me off. Everything's horrible, and I had no choice but to come home. And I'm one of the lucky ones that I was able to even come home.
Yeah, and this is really difficult to talk about. But when she came home, even if she'd wanted to go back to uni, we would have just locked her in a room and not let her. The difference in her was horrible. It was really, really horrible, trying to find doctors, and, Caitlin and I have discussed it before now. I know this is going to sound really horrible, and I still kind of tear up now when I think about it. We were so worried about her mental state that I would actually lie in bed just praying that she wasn't going to close the door, because if she closed the door, maybe I couldn't hear, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And that's how bad things got. So we're talking about someone who's in this state. No, I'm not a soft person. I'm a very practical person. We're talking about someone who's in this state, and this is after, we've scrabbled around everywhere to get medical help for her, because, it's really hard when you're a regional area. You can't just snap your fingers and get,
and this is also
get psychological help.
And this is also another thing with the whole, that grey area. I wasn't sick enough to even go to anywhere inpatient or anything like that. Basically, they put me on what was called crisis care, and I sat with a psychiatrist for 4 hours. We got a couple of diagnoses, and then it was basically well, hope your parents can help out, and off home I went. Even if I was to say, hey, I'm suicidal, and go to the ER, they'd just send me home the next day. There was literally no help. You have to be so, and I don't think a lot of people understand this, to be sanctioned or to be put into inpatient treatment, particularly in Queensland. You have to be so sick. But the caveat is you have to be so sick that you will hurt somebody else. They don't, and this doesn't sound horrible, but they don't care if you're going to hurt yourself. They don't care if you hurt yourself, if you kill yourself, anything like that. They don't care. They only care about the people that are going to hurt someone else, or when their mental health is impacting on the community around them, which is 2% of people with mental illness.
Correct. So you imagine Caitlin is in this state, and we're trying to help, and I'll admit it, we weren't the best help. We did the best we could, but we had no idea what we were dealing with. It was a big learning curve for us too. And you turn around, and it's in the meantime, you've got Centrelink harassing, asking for money to be paid back. You can't do that. You can't cope with that, and they won't let someone else speak on your behalf.
No.
So you end up getting to the stage where it's just if you think it's Centrelink funding, you don't answer the phone. And I wonder how many people are in that position. Now, we mightn't have been the greatest help in the world, but at least she wasn't on her own. How many of these people, these over 2,000 people who have died after getting robo-debt letters, were on their own?
Yeah.
You really, really need to think about that, and that's something that they're not. And I was absolutely horrified yesterday when the minister was asked about it, and he basically just poo-pooed and went, oh, you can't connect that, and it would be foolhardy, it was no big deal.
Yeah.
You know, I'm pretty sure if we turned around and said, hey, Labor are looking at changing the franking credits, and since they've been talking about that and sending out flyers, over 2,000 pensioners have died. Do you think maybe they might be